While the first Devil May Cry was a huge success, the sequel was not developed by director Hideki Kamiya. To this day, the initial director for Devil May Cry 2 is unknown, but since Capcom was dissatisfied with the work of this unidentified director, Hideaki Itsuno was brought in late into development to make the game as good as possible before shipping 5 months later. Even though Itsuno only worked on DMC2 in the final few months, he is still the only one that is credited as the director of the game. With such a troubling development, did the developer still manage to create a worthy second installment in the Devil May Cry series? Well, I'm about to find out.
Where there's a will, right?
The game starts promising as we first meet the new playable character Lucia and are then reintroduced to Dante, who makes a cool entrance. While they hardly say anything, Lucia hints to Dante to meet him at Vie de Marly, where Lucia's mother Mathieu is living. After surviving an explosion, Mathieu appears, shares that she knew Dante's father Sparta and urges him to help Lucia fight Arius, who uses demonic powers to rule the world. In this game, Dante flips a coin whenever he needs to make a decision because this is considered cool, I guess. Since the coin lands on heads, Dante agrees to help. After fighting off countless demons, Lucia confronts Arius, who reveals that Mathieu is not Lucia's mother and that he is the one who created her. Later they meet again, and as Lucia is unable to defeat him, she ends up getting captured, though Dante arrives just a bit later to free her. The third time they meet, Dante stops Arius in the middle of his ritual to become immortal and shoots him down with his pistols. After this, Dante and Lucia can't rest yet as the portal to the demon world is opened. Dante flips a coin to decide who should enter the portal and close it from the inside. And since the coin lands on heads, Dante enters the portal to finish off Argosex. Once Dante leaves to deal with Argosex, it turns out Arius is still alive thanks to his demonic power. Thus it is up to Lucia to finish him off once and for all. Meanwhile, Dante yields similar results and ends Argosex's life. Given that the portal is closed, Dante rides further into the demon realm on his motorcycle. Now that the fighting is over, Lucia looks at Dante's coin only to realize that both sides are identical, meaning Dante was always in control and did not let fate decide. At the end, Lucia hangs out at Dante's shop where the sound of a motorcycle is heard in the background, ending the story of Devil May Cry 2. The game tries to have a grander scope with its story, but fails at this because there isn't a whole lot happening. Even though the voice acting is much better than in the first game, the characters lack personality and hardly talk at all. Dante is still cool, but he no longer cracks jokes, which is a shame because that gave him a lot of charm in the first game. Lucia is the most fleshed out of all the characters in the game, but even then I wasn't invested in her story. This means the cutscenes just drag on and are boring to sit through. Even though the first game's cutscenes were by no means perfect, they were at the very least entertaining to watch. After having beaten the game, I had a hard time recalling what happened in the hours that I played the game, making for a very bland story.
They really made a big mess, didn't they?
So if the story is forgettable, is the gameplay at least good? Sadly, no. While this game is much easier compared to the first game, getting an S rank is much harder, which is based on clear time, orbs collected, stylish average, damage taken and items used. But what I do appreciate is that you get to see how you did on a specific aspect, making it much easier to determine what you need to work on to get a better ranking for the next mission. Puzzles have been toned down, thus you can focus more on the combat. While I like that there is less emphasis on puzzles, unfortunately this makes the combat flaws much more apparent. The first thing I had to get used to was the new control scheme, as you now attack with triangle instead of circle and X is used for jumping instead of triangle. You also now have air hike from the start, thus you no longer need to spend red orbs to unlock this feature. To make the dodging easier, there's now a dedicated dodge button, though I hardly ever use this as you roll quite slowly. You can also run up walls, which looks cool, but more often than not I accidentally perform this trick, making it more annoying than useful. What is great though is that you now know what enemy you are targeting, making it much easier to focus on a specific enemy, though unfortunately the automatic targeting system can occasionally be annoying, especially with the Bulwark boss fight, where it often targets the wolves while I want to target Bulwark himself. What is disappointing is that the delayed button input for different combos has been removed, as you now need to press the analog stick in combination with the attack button, and I don't know why this was changed, as this feels much less rewarding and can be quite confusing, which is why I resorted to the basic combo, whereas in the predecessor I felt much more encouraged to vary the combos I used. At the very least you can now cycle through your ranged weapons, meaning you no longer have to slowly select one via the inventory screen. What? The levels are now much larger compared to the first game, but the developers did not make the levels interesting, so now they are just empty areas that feel lifeless. If you want to explore these bland areas, you are often rewarded with a blue orb fragment or a secret mission. The way secret missions work in this game is disappointing, as instead of doing unique challenges you just fight more enemies, which isn't fun as the combat is bland and basic.
Crap like that doesn't interest me.
Just like the first game, you use red orbs to buy items or upgrade your weapons. However, now you can no longer learn new moves for your weapons and can only increase their damage output, making the combat even more basic. This time yellow orbs have been replaced with gold orbs that function differently and instantly heal you when you get killed. What sucks though is that this happens automatically, even if you don't want to use it, which can be understandable as this lowers your overall score. But you will likely die only a handful of times as most enemies are brain dead and seem uninterested in killing you. Compare this with the first game where they were relentless. These enemies in comparison are laughable and most can be killed easily just by using your guns. Surprisingly, Devil Trigger has been improved over its predecessor, as you can now find and equip different rings that give you new attacks and bonuses, which is great. Aside from that, Dante also has access to the Majin form, which is acquired by transforming when low on health. And in this form you deal way more damage, making bosses a joke. Speaking of bosses, they are extremely underwhelming. There are now more bosses, but more does not equal good, and unfortunately in this game it's quantity over quality, with Infected Chopper being the prime example of lazy design, resulting in a boring and forgettable boss battle. There are also some bosses that summon basic enemies, which is just a lazy way to make the fight more challenging. The boss I like the least, Jocat Gulm, has hard to read attacks and was just not fun to fight. Though there were a few bosses that were actually fun to fight and put up a decent challenge, which are Nevasturus, the Despair embodied and possessed Arius. I was expecting Lucia's campaign to be the exact same as Dante's, but I was pleasantly surprised as she gets to fight some different bosses and the missions are all differently structured, so this made it feel less repetitive to play through. Unfortunately, Lucia gets another underwater level, which is even less fun than the underwater section from the first game, as it is now in third person, making it much harder to move around. But overall, Lucia's campaign still feels like false marketing, as it was marketed to be a totally different campaign, which is certainly not the case. After beating both Dante's and Lucia's stories, you unlock hard mode, and beating the hard mode with Dante will unlock Trish as a playable character. But since this game is so bland, I have no desire to play it again on hard mode.
Whatever.
Beating each campaign also unlocks Diesel outfits for Dante and Lucia, and this feels really out of place, but since this game is sponsored by Diesel for some reason, it had to be included. I shouldn't forget to mention Bloody Palace, which makes its debut in this game, in which you get to fight off waves of enemies and can jump 1, 10 or 100 levels at a time. Based on how far you get, you earn a certain amount of orbs, but given the bland combat system, I quickly lost interest. Graphically, the game still holds up, and the character models look much more detailed compared to the first game, and I really like Dante's design in this game, though what I find odd is that you can turn off the subtitles, which was possible in the first game. The soundtrack is again fantastic, though there are less standout tracks compared to the first game, but that could also be because I felt less engaged while playing this game.
Maybe another time.
Before playing this game, I was expecting it to be totally awful since everybody considers this a bad game, and while it is underwhelming, it's still enjoyable at times. While I enjoyed playing as Dante, playing more of Devil May Cry 2 as Lucia made me feel burnt out. Not because her campaign is worse, but because at that point I was no longer able to accept the mind-numbing combat with brain-dead enemies. And I have no desire to play this game a third time on the hard difficulty with Dante to unlock Trish as a playable character. So on its own, this game is okay, but this game lacks the challenge and over-the-top action that I am looking for in a Devil May Cry game. All of the negatives add up, making Devil May Cry 2 inferior to the first game. But at least the future looks bright, as I hear great things about Devil May Cry 3, so I am eager to check out that game in the next video.